Folks, we're going to start in a minute. Take your seats, if you like. Yes, it doesn't work. It's blue back there, and it's the big ones that are not working. They didn't work all day yesterday for me. I was in here like twice.
Yeah. We switched over last night. So
okay.
Oh, okay.
Do you want a different dongle, maybe? Is that the problem?
No. We tried on there.
Oh, okay.
Are you able to use it?
Yeah, let's use that one.
Yeah,
we did that.
Now and all.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have a volunteer for that?
I don't think so.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. We're just dealing with a few technical issues up here. Please have a seat or take your side discussions to the hallway. This is Quick, our second session for the week. If someone could close the doors in the back, that'd be fantastic too. Oh, thank you. We need someone to take minutes today. Do we have any volunteers? I know you're bright-eyed and okay. Brian Trammell is exempted because he did such a fantastic job yesterday. He even minuted it in a foreign language, which is fantastic. So true. Any volunteers? Otherwise, we will volunteer someone. Chris Wood, thank you very much. You're a gentleman. So please do it in the Jabber channel, and if folks could help him out by correcting or elaborating where necessary, or capturing things that he fails to capture, that would be very helpful. Sorry, on the Etherpad, I'm sorry. On the Etherpad. If you could refrain from translating it to another language, we would very much appreciate that. So this is our second session. The blue sheets. We'll circulate the blue sheets in a moment. We have a scribe. Note well, we can get up on the screen actually. As we've said so many times before, these are the terms under which we participate here in the IETF regarding things like intellectual property, regarding things like professional behavior. We do take these seriously, so please familiarize yourself with these if you're not already aware. Oh, sorry, yeah. Agenda bashing. Today, we are going to continue to go over the issues against the base drafts, especially the version ossification and the other issues we deferred yesterday. Then, as time permits, we're going to talk about the recovery draft and the HTTP draft. If we could reserve, we had a side meeting this morning with some HTTP folks. I'd like to reserve about 10 or 15 minutes to have a discussion about HTTP priorities. So we'll make sure to do that before the end. Do we have any other agenda bashing?
Yeah, Chris, I'd just like to make a quick announcement. With Antoine Laval from Microsoft Research, we're preparing a workshop proposal for NDSS this year, focusing on quick security and privacy. Hopefully that'll be accepted and that'll be announced sometime mid-September. And the workshop usually takes place sometime in February. So if you know of anyone, friends and family who are working on this particular issue, please encourage them to, continue that work and then bring it to the workshop when the time comes. We've reached out to a couple of people who are actively working in this area and related TLS aspects. So it should be quite interesting. So.
And one other thing on the agenda, we'll reserve a brief amount of time at the end to talk about planning for the future. I don't think we're going to be able to announce the next interim's location and time firmly this week, but hopefully we'll be able to do that in the next week or so. Okay, so let's get started. I think yesterday we deferred 2844. Client connection IDs are broken. David Shkenazi, were you able to make some progress on that? I know it's hard.
Yes, David Skenazy, Google. So I applied the changes that we discussed yesterday to the PR. I saw at least one comment saying that it addressed the concerns were resolved. What do people think now? Mainly, it's changing the must to a should and adding a sentence saying like, this breaks these features, and so you must not do this unless you know that those are not in use.
Any further comment on that, or should we go ahead and try and get consensus on the list?
I'm sorry, I took a preliminary look, but that last part I have not studied properly. I can do that today. But I took a preliminary look, and the must should is fine, but the rest I'm not sure about because I haven't taken or studied it yet. I can do that today.
So what we might do then is wait about another week, and you can have some discussion on the issue, and then if things look settled there, we'll go ahead and issue the consensus call after that. Make sense? Okay. And again, a reminder, the acoustics in this room are horrific, so please speak distinctly and close to the mic if you can.
Does anybody know how to scroll horizontally in this Chromebook? Oh. So if I swipe, then it wants to go back in history. Oh, how many fingers are you using for this? This. Oh. Oh, they need to be. Why is it working now? There.
Okay. So that was 2844. Next up, 2863, I believe we deferred. Martin Siemens' issue on unrecoverable loss pattern leads to deadlock. Where did we leave that?
That has gotten less, not more clear in the past 24 hours. So I do not think we're prepared to have any kind of consensus calls currently.
Okay.
I think David may have to reestablish himself as chair of the design team.
I think you said that no progress.
Yeah.
Okay.
David Skenazy. Yeah, negative progress.
Okay.
There is discussion about reopening things that we landed, so we're going to take that back with the same suspects on the discard keys design team and come back with something that we all agree on.
Okay. Speaking of which, 2741, revisit initial key discard. Has any progress been made there? So we're punting on this one as well?
So the message here is that there's a cluster of issues that are all around this, and we will be reopening some, and all the ones that fall into this bucket. Revisit initial key discards, the unrecoverable loss pattern one, and even potentially the timing side channel one will be resolved at the end of this thing. But at the moment, it's gotten worse, not better.
Can any... Always what a chair wants to hear. Is there any progress that can be made in this meeting? Is there any useful?
No, I don't think this would be a very good use of our time here. That requires time in front of a whiteboard and all sorts of other things.
Is this something that you believe you can bring the group and get consensus on the list, or are we going to have to wait until the interim?
This is not a disagreement. It's more along the lines of we've now come to new understandings about the properties of the system, and we need to simply work in the design team to come up with a solution. We should have something by the interim. If we don't, then you can fire us all.
We'll save a lot of money.
We'd save a lot of time and money.
Okay. Well, we'll wait to hear from you.
Yep.
The screens are making me nervous now. Okay. That leaves us...
I propose we do the version ossification thing.
Or straight to version ossification?
Yeah. There are probably other ones that we can do, but that one seems to me to be...
That is the
quite
chunky
important.
one, yeah. So 2496, quick version ossification. Oh, can you find the slides?
Mark, just a note. I want to make sure that we get to the recovery issues. So as long as this is...
I can't understand you, I'm sorry.
I want to make sure that we get to
Yes.
the recovery issues.
Yes, we will time bound this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just one last thing on the discard keys. I unarchived the discard keys channel on Slack. I will be coordinating to see if we can meet in person during this week and make progress there with the design team. So whoever wants to be part of that, send a message on the Discard Keys channel on Slack.
Wow.
Good. What was off yesterday as well?
All right.
As you can see, the first step in
Becker, can someone contact the secretariat and ask them to tell them the screens aren't working again?
as you can see, the first step in bringing version ossification is use Comic Sans. Christian Wiedemann, Kazuho, and I sat down and tried to work on this problem. This draft is more like a problem. Sorry, this presentation is like a problem statement than it is like a solution. I tried to present the problems and then walk through all the horrific ideas we had to try to fix them, none of which are really good. So maybe someone in this room will have a better idea. Next slide. So, okay, here's the high level problem. Like the version's like right there. It's like an invariant, it's in the header. It's like bytes, you know, it's bytes 1 to 5 or 0 to, or, you know, however you count it. 2 to 6, I guess, 2 to 5. And so like what happens if middle blocks just start rejecting anything with a long header that isn't version 1, which like is not entirely out of the question, given that we've already established there'll do lots of other stuff that looks like basic pattern matching. That would obviously make it hard to deploy quick version 2. And you know, you end up with some version of the world where like you can't do that. So that would be sad, I suppose. We can always, as usual, stuff the version somewhere else like we want to do, but like that was annoying in TLS, so maybe we don't have to do it again. Next slide. So the first thing we did was try to sit back and say like, what's the threat model for this? Like, I mean, because this is basically an attack by the middle boxes, let's be clear. So what's our threat model for the middle boxes? And we sort of said like there are two kinds of like threat models. Like one is implementers who are like really pretty lazy, right? Like they don't really read the spec, they just sit there with like TCP dump and they're like, oh, well, like all these packets have like 1 here, so I guess it must be 1. They might like check the quick bit and they check the version, and maybe they do, depending on the situation, maybe they do state enforcement. So they say, well, if I have, you know, if I have NAT state or some other kind of state for this host port quartet, then I check the version, but otherwise I don't. That's like a pretty common thing to do is people check on the opening, but on the rest of the thing. So that's like version 1, and like it's not, you know, motivations vary, but those are people who aren't trying very hard. On the other end are people who are like trying really hard, right? They like read the whole specification. They're actually trying to stop you from deploying the next version. And we certainly have seen this some with TLS where people were like, well, I don't want you deploying the next version. And they're willing to do essentially an arbitrary amount of work. And so that in particular means like anything we stick in the spec, like they're going to know about. So these things, so one of the things we have in the spec now is we have every version has this this encryption for the initial data, but the encryption is based on a fixed key, which is the spec. So they're going to know about that, and they're going to know that if we change it, that it's different. So first we need to decide what a threat model is. By the way, feel free to jump in at any time, because as I say, this is more almost tutorial in nature than anything else. Because what you need to do in order to defend against these people is like extraordinarily different. Next slide. So the good news is the lazy implementers thing is actually like pretty easy. And David Benjamin, I can't see him, but maybe he's here, floated a bunch of ideas for dealing with this in TLS, and you can use similar ideas here. So the first thing to do is like get the explicit version out of the header, because like that's the source of the problem. I mean, you could also just leave it there and have it be 1 all the time, but that's dumb, you're just wasting bytes. So like effectively get out of the header. And then you have like a bunch of versions of figuring out what the version is that more or less depend. Yeah, you're feeling bad now, aren't you, David? I can see it. And then you have a bunch of options that basically depend on knowing the spec, what the details of the spec. So maybe you remove the version and use trial decryption based on the per spec, the per version seed value. You replace the version with like a masked version, which is like, again, the per version seed, based on the per version seed value. Another session would have the server provide like an alternate VN, another connection. Like all of these are like trivially easy to circumvent if you actually read the specification. So like, first of all, you can just ignore the version number and just trial decrypt with the potential version. And if like the thing comes up and it looks like a quick packet and it's like properly formatted, then you're pretty sure that you did the right thing. And if it didn't, then it's garbage and you try and have the error versions. Next.
Martin Duke F5. I'm not convinced that the third option there is that easy to circumvent.
So there are 2 versions of the third option.
one of which is where you provide just an alternate version, and the other is provide an alternate version and an alternate seed.
Right.
If you don't provide an alternate seed, it's like trivial, right?
Yes.
If you don't provide an alternate version, then I think the most likely outcome is that that a lot of servers don't offer alternate versions, and what the attackers do is they're just like, well, we only let version 1 through, and then basically people are going to have to be willing to fall back to version 1, and they end up in equilibrium where basically repeated connections don't work properly, or they fall out to TCP. So I'm not entirely sure that's true, but I think it's a plausible game theory. But I agree, it's a somewhat different situation than the situation for these other ones, which are obviously trivial to get past.
Great. So I think really almost any model for this is going to require a significant, at least some critical mass of clients and servers to implement, and just count on the fact that you're breaking, you're significantly delaying those connections to create organizational pressure to not do this.
Yeah, maybe. I think some of the more aggressive versions don't have that property necessarily.
Okay.
But I mean, like that. Let's. I guess. But yes, you're right. There's a sliding scale of pressure that goes from like nobody does it to some people do it some of the time to everybody does it all the time, right? And so the more you get towards the right, the more pressure, the harder it is to get ossification. But all these are potentially legitimate. Yeah, Roberto.
Roberto Peon. There's one other thing that is interesting here, which is not necessarily preventing ossification as a first order effect, but preventing ossification by letting everybody know something is preventing them from upgrading. I believe that, we've talked about having version inside of things before, but it's interesting to have it both inside and outside so the network can respond, because that's why you have it externally. And so you can record and report and accuse by having it internally.
Great.
So, Gary Fairhurst, two things. When we want to deploy a new version of something in the network, often we want to know the new version exists to do good stuff, to let that traffic through, to classify measurements from one versus the other. If we close that, then we close an opportunity to deploy new versions. Second, I'm not convinced this threat model is the one we have to deal with. There are ways of doing versioning within QUIC. If the outer version number it gets ossified, I don't think it will get ossified. So, am I wrong? Am I right? How do we know?
Well, I think, definitely the challenging the threat model is totally legit. I think by and large, I think the threat model this group has adopted, but people can correct me, is that like we should be treating the middle boxes as the greatest extent possible as a dumb pipe, and like trying to avoid them looking at any data, and not being particularly sympathetic to maybe if they knew there was more version information, they would do better. But again, that's a question for the group. Certainly you're right that if the outer version gets ossified, we can move to inner version, and then like when that gets ossified, move to inner version. I mean, like that's basically where like people are worried TLS is going to go. But I think the idea here was to avoid having to do that dance.
So it seems like a cut ahead to try and stop something that we might think is an issue, and that's what threats are. So yeah, I get it, but I don't agree with the threat model.
Okay, fair enough. For what it's worth, my understanding is that Google's already seen this with QUIC in their deployments.
Come back on that one. Yes, it's true, but we don't know it's true of IETF QUIC, where people actually know this exists. I think at that time people didn't really know what QUIC was, and the information on which to look at particular things.
Sure, I can't speak to that intelligently. So like I say, we have a number of options if we're willing to just deal with lazy implementers. For hardworking implementers, you need the client and server to share some kind of secret information somehow. There's just no way around it as far as I can tell. That was the consensus of like the Christian and Kazuha and myself. Next slide. So, sorry, I did these slides a while ago. Can you show me the slide after this, just so I'm like, yeah, just so I'm oriented. Okay, good, back. Okay, good. So, the bottom line is, you have to encrypt the initial somehow, and so there's a number of possible ways to do this. One is to and there's this detail about child encryption or separately encrypting the version number. That's like a really boring crypto detail, which I'm not going to bother you with right now. There's the variants where you deliver the key in ESNI. There's the variants in an ESNI style DNS record. There's the variants where you deliver the key like in the previous connection. And so that goes back to the point Martin Duke was making, I think. But the bottom line is you got to like encrypt the damn thing with a key that like is not immediately available in the mailbox, or they're just going to decrypt it themselves. This obviously leaves you for what happens in case the secret isn't available. Now in the case of DNS, ESNI style approaches, the secret isn't available typically on a per server basis, that a server may not publish it. In the case of the subsequent connection version, obviously it's going to be very common the secret won't be available, and then what do you do? And so that's hence my concern about sort of first connection versus subsequent connection ossification. Whereas in the ESNI style, it's more work, but you get you get a randomized version from minute zero. It's not obviously the case. You could try doing both of these. You could try doing you can have basically a standard way to set a new salt, and then you can have subsequent connection and ESNI style, and the same people we discussed. One point Christian raised when we were discussing this is like what are the sort of trend here is the trend here, if you follow this line of reasoning, is to just completely shut the middle box out as much as you possibly can, so they can't even read any information with initial. And so, as Corey was just saying, what are the deployment implications of doing that? If you just say like, look, you're a dumb bit pipe, stay out of my way. So that's something we have to consider in any case. Next slide. This is a fine technical point, but I know there was concerns when this was initially raised about the sort of cost of having yet another public key operation for this. So ESNI obviously uses a public key because you have to worry about disclosure of the ESNI key. It's possible you could snake out here with just a symmetric key that was delivered either in band on previous connections or in DNS record. And the rationale for this is that it's like an enormous amount of work for the middle box implementer to like pull this out of DNS or make their own connection and get the information and then try to do things. And that seems like maybe it'd be something almost nobody would be willing to do. So if you assume a somewhat bounded, like hard-working implementer, then it's possible you get it with a symmetric key, and then obviously it's a much faster operation, so life is simpler. And also probably you don't have as much per packet overhead in the first packet. Yes.
Yeah. Martin Thompson, I make the observation that a lot of the stuff that we've been doing sort of assumes that symmetric crypto is free, but asymmetric crypto is prohibitively expensive for the sorts of things we're talking about. Like if you want to send a retry packet and you have to do a public key operation before you can send one, that would be, I think, a non-starter.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Right. Next slide. So there's one other suggestion that Kazuho had floated that was sort of orthogonal to this, but might be a way to deal with this that didn't have all these sort of crazy things with initial. And that was what he was calling mid-connection greasing. So the idea is that you allow people to send long header packets during the connection, and under those, the version number can obviously be random appearing, and they're generated some kind of per connection secret. This probably protects against lazy implementers. Like obviously, whether that works depends on sites really doing it. I think my concern when he raised this was it doesn't work properly if sites like basically only do version enforcement for the first packet if there's nothing in their state table. And I guess thank you for putting this in. You could do forced migrations in order to like sort of blow the state table away. Is one possibility. But again, this goes back to Martin Duke's question of like how well does the mechanism work and how much work do people have to do to get like anti-ossification defenses.
So the other observation here is that this sort of goes back to that really old issue where someone said make connection establishment look like migration. You can imagine this being you send long header packets at the front of those migrations, and that further ossifies the protocol in a different way, in that it establishes the pattern that if you're sending the first packets or the first datagrams on a path have a long header packet in them, and that's not something that we've ever promised.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Roberto says every other migration is like,
Yeah. Next slide. Right. So as I said at the beginning, this is like not like a great situation. If we're willing to say, look, we just care about people, all we're trying to do is stop people who are like too incompetent to like read the specifications and know what the invariants are, then like we have a number of options that are like, we can decide between, right? And they're largely pretty easy. Some of them may require bending the invariants a little bit. like to take the version number out or to like mask it or something, some of them maybe not, depending on which one you choose. Printing as hardworking implementers is going to be a lot harder, and is going to almost certainly require changes in the invariants in some pretty nasty ways. It also involves which particular version you choose involves some trade-offs depending on how well it works and basically how much packet bloat you introduce versus how much work the server has to do to determine which version you have. So just to give you a sense of this, child encryption has less packet bloat, but encrypting the sequence number is faster. So the version number is faster. So so first you decide what the heck our objective is here before we actually try to engineer a solution. So that's probably where I want to leave you.
Hey, Mia Kulevin. So for me, this all breaks down to whatever we do is just increasing the load or the work that somebody has to do to try to break this, which also means increasing the load on the server or on the receiver, basically. And I would actually think that this is even worse because in many situations you might have a middle box which is somewhere in the access network and has very few quick connections to handle, while the server can have very many quick connections to handle. So there is there's a big performance implementation here, and I'm not sure if it's worse is to go down this way, given that we're also uncertain about this red model and we're uncertain about what the risks are. For me, it would be really more important that we have a way out if we find this happening at some point. And there is a way out in the next version, which will be an overhead. It has a cost, but as long as we have a way out, that's the important part for me.
So I'm not actually sure that we're materially increasing the cost on either the server or the client. A number of these designs basically round up to one or two more symmetric crypto operations. So in particular, if you only support one version, then the crypto cost is identical. It only becomes a problem no matter which one of these effectively you choose. So I'm not sure actually it changes the load depending on which one you choose. Ben
Schwartz. I mostly wanted to mention that if you believe in split mode ESNI, the split mode forwarder is a middle box that needs to know the version number. So split mode ESNI is probably incompatible with in-band version number.
Yes, I think yes, you're right. Quite so. Thank you. It took me a minute, but yes, I agree with you.
David Benjamin. So I think there's a second thing that axis we should be considering in a threat model, which is whether or not, I guess it's kind of lazy and hardworking, whether or not these middle boxes can get updated. Because for TLS 1.3, the big problem was not just that the middle boxes had ossified everything and done everything wrong, but that they couldn't ship the update to fix it when we told them. And so the idea with the crazy child decryption thing, which was to pair that with rapidly cycling versions in a few deployments that can be updated quickly. And so this way, the idea was that if you cannot distinguish any two versions you do not know about, then that means that being able to deploy one new version means we can deploy any new version. And so as long as there's this rapidly cycling side that keeps things moving, then hopefully the ones that can't get updated will not be able to do this sort of stuff. The ones that can, well, we can tell them to go fix their bug and they'll fix it, which is a slight improvement over the current situation. You could argue that really it's just the rapid cycling and not the crazy child decryption that's getting us that. I think and that might not be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. That's some point. My basic assumption, as you say, is that some class and middle boxes which can't get updated. And then I think this meshes nicely with Martin Duke's point about how much commitment do we have to, how much sort of installed base of people who are exercising these functions do we have to have before it becomes unprofitable for middle boxes to ossify on these properties?
First, a question, which is, are you done with your slides?
I'm totally done. Yeah, I'm happy to sit down too.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. It's my personal belief that protecting against the lazy implementers is good, and we're missing, by the way, the lazy endpoint implementers. They exist, but I do think that it's important to think about the second aspect, which is I believe that hardworking implementers are going to do their right thing. They're going to intercept things. That's going to be something that will be necessary in many networks. That's okay. but we should consider whether or not the detection of that is part of what we need to concern ourselves with. My personal belief would also be yes.
Hi, Brian Trammell. To large part, what Roberto said, I actually want to address this last point on this slide. I haven't really heard a convincing model of what a middle box might actually want to do to Quick, right? I think that we've taken a lot of learning from some of the stuff that happened early on with Quick Crypto. I think we've taken a lot of learning for what happened in TCP. I don't think a lot of those lessons apply here. As far as I can see, there are two operations that you can do if you basically don't have the keys from both ends and can't like break everything all the way apart. There are two operations you can do with respect to version ossification. One, you can detect that it's Quick and drop it. And what we really want to keep from happening here is that Quick version 1 does not become the flag that says this is Quick versus this is not Quick. The other thing that you can do is in a future where we have determined that Quick version 1 has a vulnerability that allows an intercepting middle box to actually be able to do more than we think it can use the ability to determine Quick version 1 from Quick version 2 to force a downgrade attack. Are there any other things that we're trying to prevent happening? Because if I think we're kind of wasting our time. I see people behind me in the line. I would like to be convinced that I'm wrong.
So Martin Thompson, I don't think you're wrong. We have evidence, at least from TLS, that people do build products that detect, is this TLS, and drop it, or vice versa. Is this TLS? Well, we'll let that pass. Is this something else? Drop it. And so having the ability to obscure that, is this Quick is something that's kind of important to be able to suppress. Well, let's be clear. I don't think we can suppress is this Quick generically. Is this Quick version 1 is a signal that we want to suppress. Because that has a direct effect on our ability to deploy Quick version N.
Just thinking of queue management, Jonathan was after Ecker. He's on the other mic, so did this line until after Ecker, then Jonathan, and then... Go ahead, Subodh.
Subodh Iyengar. I'm not super convinced that just masking the version number is enough to prevent very, very motivated attackers from detecting Quick version 1 and Quick version 2 differences. For example, let's say we change the initial crypto scheme in Quick version 1 and Quick version 2. We don't know what version 2 will look like. An attacker could do trial decryption of the packet encryption scheme itself to determine whether it's version 1 or version 2. I think more substantial changes probably would need to be made to the protocol if we want complete indistinguishability between versions to exist. While having said that, I think protecting against the lazy implementers is like using obfuscation techniques to hide the version number so that like if somebody is just implementing like a middle box like the one in the IETF Quick was hard-coded to version number 7 or bit number 7, that should not be allowed to block Quick deployments of version 2 versus version 1.
But I certainly agree masking the version number is not enough to deal with someone who's hardworking. No, you have to like, okay, you're freaking me out. You have to encipher the entire block, and it has to be under a key that is not publicly known. I guess I wanted to float one other thing we've seen middle boxes do that is more aggressive than version checking, and that is protocol correctness enforcement. And so, for instance, what you do is you look at the TLS client hello, and you're like, I don't like this extension or like this extension because you bogus something like that, and then you strip it. So it's important. It's true that that's like a kind of interference that's more like aggressive than checking the version, but it's something that as long as the decryption scheme is constant for the version and that's public information, then of course you can unpack the whole thing. I mean, I felt like we did okay. Like in the experience with I mean, there's some hope, I think, that like
Middlebox people have gotten the message about TLS about these are the extension points and these are the ones that are not, and like we'll like not screw with like version with like extensions and stuff like that. So I think there's some possibility that like we solve enough of this problem that we don't have to deal with it, and we just get away with just hiding the version number. But definitely that kind of protocol enforcement is something we can see.
Jonathan Lennox, it occurs to me that we were asking why a middle box might be doing this. Another possible use case, the middle box says, Quick is great, I love Quick, but I don't want to allow random UDP through. So this is what I'm using to detect that these packets are in fact Quick and not just some other random UDP. Obviously you want that to work going forward, but you also want that to be possible, I think. So it's a little bit tricky.
Ben Schwartz. So yes, I guarantee to you that middle boxes will inspect and attempt to distinguish quick version numbers. And the reason, as Ecker said, is that the ability to parse the client hello out of the initial is version dependent. And you need to parse the client hello out of the initial if you want to do SNI-based censorship, which is very common. So those systems, even if they're set to not do any filtering at some point in time, are still going to be doing version-dependent processing. And I suspect that they're not going to fail open and let everything through if they don't like the version number.
Hi, Brian Trammell again. So one of the things I've heard is that there's, I think actually the model that Jonathan presented is probably the one that we are going to be least likely to say, no, you can't do that, because there will be an overwhelming desire to do it. And that is to say, I want to distinguish quick from garbage because I'd like to be able to let quick in and not garbage. And one of the ways that middle box vendors will try to do this is through protocol correctness enforcement. I don't actually know how that's supposed, like looking at how like the sequence of possible packets in a quick connection, there's not a lot you can do there to say, oh no, this was wrong, I'm not going to let this packet through, right? That doesn't seem useful to me. People probably try it, but it doesn't seem useful. The fact that there will be an overwhelming desire to tell a quick packet from a non-quick packet means that I think it should be a non-goal to obfuscate the distinction between quick packets and non-packets. Because if you make it a goal, you will fail, and people will invent ways to do the distinguishing, and it will be wrong, and it will break shit. I think the right way to go about this is to figure out what breakpoint we want in the wire image of the protocol, design it in, make it easy, make it obvious, put the blink tag on it, and then defend the rest. Because the rest of this is like, this rabbit hole seems like it's going to be a lot of work for a fair amount of disappointment in a couple of years.
We're going to cut the lines in a very short time, so if you want to get in line, you still can, but if nobody moves soon, Mia is the last one.
So Gori Fairhurst trying to make sure I didn't create the wrong impression. I want quick version 2 and 3 and 4 to appear. I think people will try and find which was quick 1, and people want to, when 2 is available, they'll want to know that it's not 1, but 2 going through their network, and they're going to find ways to do this. If we want to let them learn it by some heuristics, some traffic patterns, which I think is very hard, like Brian says, they will still try and do this. There will be people who produce products to do that. If we give them an easy way, they'll take the easy way. So I'm not sure that ossifying this is such a bad thing. I think it will help us deploy version 2, 3, 4.
Jana Iyengar, can you hear me, Mark? Okay, just checking. I was going to do text to voice, but I'm not doing it. I think there's a couple of points. We already have experience with the fact that people, and we know that people are looking to detect quick in the network. At the interim, I had a slide showing a bunch of firewalls and middle box vendors that are offering quick detection as a feature, and that's only going to increase as quick gets deployed more and more. I'd be surprised if that wasn't the case. I believe that that's going to be a feature for a number of reasons, and we've already seen it in play with G-Quick. I believe that the quick version number is going to be in play also, at least in part because of the SNI point. People want to be able to do SNI detection because they want to be able to block. It's done. It's already there. People, this is used for zero rating. This is used for all sorts of things, and SNI is critical to get to, and that's going to be version dependent. I don't think that we should lose fixing this problem again, protecting against lazy implementers, because at least my experience has been that that is a real problem. It doesn't seem exciting and interesting, but it is a real problem. The one data point that I have is the experience that we had with GQuick, where public documentation was available. They didn't look at it. We asked them, and they said, no, it was a doc, it was a Google Doc, and it was available, but they simply didn't look at it. And they didn't even know that it existed. But they built a feature and sold it anyways. So let's be clear about, at least, I like this distinction because I think it really lays out the options that, or the considerations we ought to have. I would say that we should at least build against lazy implementers. Whether we go against hardworking implementers or not, it's clearly going to be hard. I think Ek is exactly right here. I don't think we should lose the first, solving the first problem for the second one.
To interject quickly, so at the end of this, when we have the mic lines trained, I think we want to do a three-way hum to get a sense of the room on what we should be doing here. One would be nothing, so no prevention of version modification. One would be protect against the lazy implementers, and the last one would obviously be try to do something against the eager implementers. Just to foreshadow what we're going to do after this. And I think we're cutting the line at Ecker, unless somebody, knowing that we're going to have a hum, wants to still get into it.
Yeah. David Skenazy, Google. So we recently deployed Google Quick version 46, which finally got us to the IETF invariance, which was the old invariance before they changed. Yay. That when we did that, no one said anything. Yay, it works, everything's great. And then weeks went by, and little by little, middle box vendors came out of the woodwork. Oh, everything's on fire. You broke X, you broke Y. Turns out there are already a lot of these features. So some of them are reasonable. Identifying quick, because it's a reasonable protocol of congestion control, letting it through against other things, that I'm okay with. There are other middle boxes that we're looking at SNI. The reason for that is they were zero rating video. Like, this video service is free on their network. Whether that's a good or bad idea is beside the point, but that's what they're doing, and they were complaining very aggressively when we broke them just because we slightly moved the bits 4 bytes to the right. But the problem is, like Jana was saying, these people who implement this don't read the docs. They fall completely in the category of these lazy implementers. And I'm really scared that we could end up in the situation like TLS, where they do something lazy and then we're stuck. So I personally think we do want to do something there. But protecting against the hardworking implementers, we have a lot of smart people in the room who can come up with incredibly convoluted, smart ideas. That's just terrifying, though. At the end of the day, if the client is able to identify which versions you speak, so is the middle box going to be, to some extent, unless we throw huge resources at the server side, and I don't think we want to do that, at least from the Google servers perspective. So my personal take would be, do a little bit, so someone who's just being lazy, things fall over for them and they notice it very early, but don't get too smart, because that could be really dangerous.
We're going to cut the line at Ian unless Patrick was on his way to the microphone and took a detour. I'm not sure. No, you weren't. Okay.
Mia Kulin, I wanted to come back to this use case where, for whatever reason, you want to identify certain information, maybe the SNI, and you will block traffic if you don't identify it. What that means is that people think they have a strong need to only allow certain kind of traffic, and they will block everything else. So if they can't get this information, they will block it. They will block all quick, right? So, yeah. So, I mean, like, some of those cases might actually be the right decision, but I don't want to get in a situation where we get to the point where people just don't want to support quick anymore because it's too complicated for them, because that would be like the worst outcome of this working group. I don't think that greasing the version number gets us to that point, but like it has a cost, and I'm not sure if there's a benefit. We know for real that there's a cost. We don't know if there will be benefit.
Ben Schwartz. So there's been some discussion of a quick bit, some way to identify quick or not quick. I want, at a minimum, the inverse. I would like to make sure that there is a space of packets, an inverse wire image of quick that is guaranteed never to collide, because I would like to be able to multiplex other protocols against quick on the same ports.
We did work through that.
Well, I understand, but this is, we're talking about changing the wire image here.
Okay,
so
got it. You want to
that
maintain that property that we currently have in case we then do something about Ossification. Got it.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing I will say is, if you want to disclose the version number to for statistical and monitoring purposes, you can do it in the last packet.
Eric Stroller, I want to make 2 points. First, to Miriam's point, forcing people to block quick in order to do censorship is the point. In fact, the whole point of like ESNI and things like it is to make it so you have to block everything if you want to block anything. That's like the purpose of the exercise. Second, to David's point, there are 2 costs, I think, to trying to defend these hardworking implementers. One is like, whatever calories we burn thinking about it, and the second is the cost of servers. I agree that it will be expensive in terms of the cost of our calories. I do not think it actually has to be expensive to the servers. A number of designs that I've seen that we discussed, I think, can be done with effect almost incremental, zero to incremental server load. So if that's people's concern, then I think that like that's something we should explore. Then I think that's something we should explore. If people's concern is like too much work for us, that's a totally different reason. And as it should be clear, I'm like kind of undecided between these. Like I'm philosophically aligned towards doing a really, really good job, but I understand like that maybe worse is better. So.
Kazuhoka, I have one comment and one clarifying question. Regarding Miriam's comment, my point is that mid-connection racing is a good way to prevent the middle boxes trying to decrypt the client initial to see if the client hello is good. Because in case of mid-connection grazing, the middle box would see a long header packet containing another version that's undecryptable. And if those middle boxes drop that because it's undecryptable, then the connection would fail. So that's a good way of defending against those kind of boxes. And the clarification question is regarding the consensus call. Are we going to discuss the options based on the presumption that they are all optional features of Quick? Or are we considering them as a mandatory feature?
I didn't catch the last part you said. Are we considering them as
optional? I mean, are we making consensus calls based on the assumption that each option is considered as an optional feature of Quick? Or are we considering them as a mandatory feature?
Thanks for raising that. So I had assumed we were going to discuss them as mandatory, but that was an assumption, and that might be my assumption.
It's good Kazuo raises this point because some of these are potentially optional, and some of them potentially not optional. So like the version where you like remove the version number and you trial decrypt, like obviously is not optional. And the version where you do mid-connection greasing or this alternate version number is optional. And so that's actually, I don't know how to, that's why you get paid the big bucks to sort this out, but like it's a more complicated question than just optional versus not optional.
Ian Sweat, Google. Thank you for bringing that up, Kazuo. I assumed that they were all going to be optional, so obviously I was wrong. One question is, are any of the options going to be, I think what Christian at some point floated, of basically like shipping new versions in a relatively timely fashion? So like the version update mechanism of these middle boxes is actually exercised along the lines of, is that do nothing? I mean, that's not really do nothing. That's specifically saying like we are proactively going to try to ship versions on a like once a year or more frequent basis, because as long as we're exercising these joints at that frequency, we think it's okay-ish or something.
So, I mean, we can hum on this, but it's kind of non-binding, right? I mean, we're building a protocol here, and we can hum about what's optional, what's required, and so on. But we can't really, agree on shipping very frequently for the foreseeable future. So it's an aspiration that we can have in addition to something in the protocol or not. But it's what the hum do really, other than like giving us a good feeling?
Okay, thanks. And then I think I wanted to call it that
I did have closed the lines behind you, by the way.
I'm a little more concerned about like more intrusive termination than I am about any of these things at this point. But that's just me.
Christian, are you using your IAB override, or did you not hear me?
He's saving.
Right.
Are you suggesting there's an IAB override?
So I thought this was going to be an easy three-way hum, and it sounds like it's not. So I'm not going to engineer this hum up here in my current shape. But if somebody wanted to propose something.
That's actually what I was standing up to say earlier. I think you can make the optional or not optional question a later one. If you believe this problem is worth solving, that's what it seems like this slide is about. Maybe that's one way of slicing this up.
So what I wanted to do is do a three-way hum on this is we should do nothing here, or we should try and protect against lazy implementers, or we should try against to protect against lazy and hardworking implementers, because I guess one would subsume the other. If that's a useful hum to have, then we can have another hum on something else afterwards. That's good. If we need to have a two-dimensional hum, then
no. So
okay, good.
my suggestion would be, if you want it to be optional so that you don't implement it, then hum for the first one.
Okay, that's fair. Ben.
I have some concern about this lazy eager distinction. I think if I were a really lazy implementer, I would just grab the some quick library and shove the packets through the parser.
So if then you should hum for the last option, I think is what the answer would be, because that is the distinction, right? A lazy implementer wouldn't even do that, right?
I mean, I think it's actually less engineering work than writing your own parser. And while there are certainly some super tightly CPU constrained places where you can't do this, I think CPUs continue to get cheaper.
All right. So I feel unfair now to Christian, because I might even sit down and people keep going to the microphone.
Is that maybe this is useful to get a sense of the room, but effectively, if there would be a solution for protecting against smart implementers that has zero cost, right, then why not do it? But given that we don't have it, so I think the answer depends on the solution we're looking at.
Sure. Right. Anyway, hum time. Okay. Christian, I owe you beer.
It's about the hum.
I'm sure Christian's was a valid comment too. Anyway, go ahead. Be quick.
So there's understand the spec, implementations that don't understand the spec, and there's implementations that understand the spec. Right? That's one way to define lazy versus hardworking here. I don't know if you want to change anything. I just want to say that this is a definition that we can hopefully agree on, because it's actually definitional.
I'm going to stick with the lazy hardworking just because that's what I'm going to do.
There's nuance to those.
Right. And this is, to get a general sense of the room, the details of this, obviously, we'll then need to have proposals worked out. Right. So as I said, we're going to do 3 hums on whether we should do nothing to prevent version ossification, whether we should try and protect against version ossification or against lazy implementers that would otherwise ossify, or if we should try to have a strive type of protection against the hardworking implementers. Right. So if you believe we should do nothing to prevent version ossification, please hum now. All right, thank you. If you believe we should do something to protect against lazy implementers, please hum now. Thank you. And if you believe we should do something to protect against hardworking implementers, please hum now. I would call that strong consensus for the middle option, protecting against the lazy implementers.
Okay, I'll note that there were a few hums in Jabber for nothing, and I don't see any in Jabber for the other options. So it sounds like it's definitely the middle option, or even middle biased weak.
So just to be clear, this is a decision that will bind our.
Can you speak up a bit, Martin?
Sorry, Martin Thompson. To be clear, this is a decision that will bind our actions in this working group before we ship the protocol.
Yes.
And that does not preclude someone building something additional at some later time.
So it's called a decision to bind future action is often problematic.
Exactly. I'm just clarifying that for
So
those people.
I don't know that we can really do that.
So for those people who wanted to, for instance, do the dedicated, hardworking, maybe even malicious implementers who want to do things with the protocol,
So
we can augment this later on.
that's my understanding. So what I think the purpose of the hum is to determine what we need to do for Quick version 1, which means the currently open specs. And I think we hummed on that. It doesn't preclude anything further in future versions of Quick. Martin, yeah, Kazoo.
Martin Duke, yeah, the optional stuff almost by definition doesn't need to block V1 because it's optional, as long as we've put some thought into how this would work. We'll have there'll be a decent interval of time where there's QXXX versions going around, there's FF whatever versions going around, which will give us some protection against this, but I would feel pretty happy if we had a notion of how we're going to approach it in an optional manner and have that follow the core Quick specification.
What is this? You said you'd be happy to follow this in an optional manner.
To have a solution for lazy implementers that is optional, that follows the core, to have that fully spec'd out and RFC'd if necessary after the rest of Quick goes to RFC.
Right. So this is an interesting point, right? The question is this an optional part of the specification specification, or is it required or recommended?
That's dependent on the design. I mean, I don't think we're going to have that argument now, but there's some designs that really requires this to be everyone to do it, and others that are purely optional.
Okay.
Yeah, Kulevin, I just wanted to say, because I'm not sure it was on the slide, there is this option to do nothing and protect against lazy implementers by deploying 2 versions at once, right?
I didn't quite hear you. The acoustics are really poor. You need to really speak into the microphone.
There is an option to do nothing and protect against lazy implementers by deploying 2 versions at once.
It's not clear whether that's a long-term solution. It might help us initially, right? But at some point, it might not stop helping us.
By deploying versions very quickly and dynamically.
Right, but this is again sort of this is also what was suggested earlier, right? That if we all agree to rev the version very quickly, that would help us. That is certainly true, but it's not really something that the working group can agree to because it affects people's deployments. Right, we can aspire to that, but we can certainly agree to put something in the protocol as a mechanism.
But we don't have to work this out now. I'm just saying, because we did this hum, there's somehow also this in between.
The hum, I think, was on whether we include something in the design of the protocol to prevent against version ossification by lazy implementers, right? Because that's what the issue is about. The issue isn't about, should we all try and rev the versions very quickly.
Kazuhoku, actually, my assumption about the consensus code was a bit different, meaning that, I thought that we were humming on if we are confident about spending our V1 discussion time on dealing with about those options. I mean, so I think our rough consensus is that we would spend time on discussing how we prevent those lazy implementers, but that we wouldn't spend V1 discussion time on discussing how we prevent those hardworking ossifications.
Well, yes and no, in the sense that we would certainly, so the hum would certainly indicate that we should spend our time on the middle bullet, so to speak, but with the intent of actually coming up with a mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, that matched my assumption as well, which is we were going to spend some time on this problem, and then maybe we'd come up with a solution which didn't require changing the wire protocol, or convince ourselves we didn't need one, in which case we would put it down, in this case, not thinking about it, or we come up with a solution which required changing the wire protocol, in which case we'd make those changes. That's basically what I assumed we were humming for. Yeah, I guess I don't know how you want to actually try to make progress in this. Do we need a design team? Do we need something else?
That's the next question.
Okay. Shall I step back and let you manage that?
Are you volunteering?
Certainly happy to be part of that, yeah. Happy to organize if you want.
So Martin Duke observed that if we remove this from blocking V1, we might have some time, or suggested that that was the case. Because we're in the state now where the core transport and invariance and even recovery is getting to the point where it's pretty mature, I suspect that those will be sitting there done for some time while we wait for the H3 stuff to finalize. And so I suspect we'll have plenty of time to sort this out. This is not a particularly difficult problem, and if we go for this sort of lazy implementers one, where we can come up with a pretty simple solution, I hope.
Should we timeline this to have it closed by the interim? Like have a design team of some sort work on this, and then
I'd like to say bring a proposal at the interim.
Bring the proposal at the interim?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we see a show of hands who's interested in contributing to that? Okay.
The design team to prevent version ossification for lazy implementers.
Along these lines.
So for the minute, can you put your hands up again? I'll put you in the minutes. We have Kazuo, we have Jana, David Skenazy, Martin Duke, Christian Wittmer, Martin Seaman, Roberto, Sabod, Ecker, the usual suspects, I guess.
Chris Wood.
Chris Wood. More hands keep going up. Yari Arko in the very back.
Martin Thompson.
Martin Thompson.
You're all right.
Right. Sorry, I forgot your name. Eric Kinnear. So I think we have more than enough. And if I haven't called your name and you're interested, I'm sure you know one of the people we named. Go to them and then.
And can we have a volunteer to lead that effort? Ecker, you're a gentleman. Okay. So if you didn't put your hand up but you change your mind, please go and talk to Ecker and he'll coordinate that group, and we'll hopefully hear back from you at the interim or earlier.
Yeah, earlier is possible.
Earlier is good.
Roberto's still up.
Do we want to consider early detection of a downgrade, you could call it a downgrade attack, in scope for this? Because if you want to detect a downgrade, it should be early enough that you understand it's a different attack surface, potentially.
I want to let's have a very quick discussion, but if it rat holes, we're going to punt it to the design team.
We talked about this before. When we removed the version negotiation stuff from the draft, that was on the understanding that we would have a solution. That hasn't been forthcoming, or we haven't discussed it at any length. I think that's because we made a mistake and dropped it from the issues list. Version downgrade is not something you can really detect until you've got a shared context. And so whatever we do, I think we need to couple that to the version negotiation work that's ongoing. And I think Eka has a proposal on that one that's relatively sensible, so we should look at that.
Because I want to make sure I understand the notion of downgrade. So in the present quick design, there is no version negotiation at all, right? And so version downgrade is impossible. I was not proposing to change those semantics. I'd like to change those semantics, but like in this I was not proposing to change them. So basically, I don't think this would change anything in that respect, but maybe I misunderstood something about how you're reasoning. Okay.
I'm going to respond to this. David Skenazy, as the person who wrote the PR to remove version downgrade prevention from the protocol. When the reason we did that at the time was that we were rat-holing quite a bit about how to do it, and the consensus in the room at the time, which we decided to move forward with, was take it out for now. We will, whatever happens, be able to implement it as a transport parameter extension. So when Quick V2 comes into being, it will come alongside an extension to Quick V1 so that both can prevent this downgrade. So that's the current plan of record.
So to be clear, I'm trying to avoid rat-holing on this. I'm asking what I hope to be a procedural question. For the design team we are making to tackle this specific problem, is downgrade detection, not prevention, detection, part of the scope of the design team?
I think no, and the answer is there isn't any version negotiation at all. So therefore, you don't need to detect downgrades.
Okay. All right. So I think that closes out the issues that we deferred yesterday. Did we miss any there? Okay. That leaves a couple of different discussions. We have the recovery draft, which I think it's good to do in this room because it's a broader set of folks than come to our interim sometimes. We also have the HTTP draft, and we also have the discussion of HTTP priorities. What I'd suggest is we take 15 minutes to discuss priorities now, at the most, and then discuss recovery, and then with the remaining time, we go back to the other HTTP issues. Does that sound reasonable? Oh, I thought Christian was going to the mic. Okay.
As long as we can time bound the priorities discussion.
Of course. That was part of the deal. So there was a side meeting this morning about HTTP priorities, and I think a useful discussion there. One of our constraints for the HTTP deliverable is that we need to deliver something that's compatible with the semantics of HTTP2, I believe is the rough phrasing that's in the charter. And one can interpret that to include priorities. And so our deliverable currently has an HTTP2 somewhat compatible priority scheme in it. But there's been another larger discussion in the community about how HTTP2 priorities is not optimal. And so the question is, as a group, do we want to try and just deliver something compatible with HTTP2 priorities, or do we want to do something else? So Ian, you were leading, where do you think there he is? You were leading that side meeting. Do you want to kind of summarize what the proposed path is from that group of people? Either mic is fine.
Okay. Yeah, I can choose a friend if I need to. So what depth of information would you like me to take, the high-level takeaways?
I would, we have talked about this extensively in the past in several venues.
Right.
Let's just cut to the chase.
Okay. So the short of it is there's fairly broad interest, at least in the room this morning, in removing the existing H2 style priorities from the HTTP3 spec. There was quite a bit of interest in trying to ship something simpler in time for HTTP3. There was a little bit of disagreement, I think, about whether that should be a blocking item or not a blocking item. There was also some discussion as to whether that prioritization information should be conveyed in a frame or a header, as in Kazoo and Lucas's header proposal. There was very broad support for a setting that indicated, are you actually doing prioritization? And if so, like what scheme are you using? This would both allow you to...
Sure. So I don't think that there was support for that. So we might have to discuss that a little further. I think there was support for the notion that you could signal in H2 that you're not using the H2 priority scheme. Which might be the same thing. Might be the same thing or might not be, depending on whether you want to have multiple different priority schemes that could be deployed in parallel.
So,
but I think the critical issue that we want to move forward on in the relatively timely manner is kind of getting broader consensus on the idea that we will not do H2 style priorities in HTTP3. Is that correct?
I think so. I think we need to have coordination with the HTTP working group, and if we can get consensus in those two groups about what HTTP3 will do or will not do, at least for priorities, then we can take that to the area directors and talk about our charter and see if we need to make a charter change or not. And so I think one of the things that came up was if the HTTP working group ships a setting that says we're not using priorities, then HTTP3 can decide that that's the semantic, that it is, considering to be the right semantic to carry forward. And assuming that, someone at some point, and we can talk about timing, but not today, will come up with an extension that works, whose semantics can be mapped to HTTP2 and HTTP3 and be better than what we have now.
Yeah, there's very broad interest in that, but
Yeah.
I think we still don't have that exactly nailed down.
Right. But we're in this uncomfortable situation where there's very little belief in the community that HTTP2 priorities are working well, and people don't want to persist that into the new protocol. But we don't have consensus on the replacement yet. Roberto.
Roberto Peon. As one of the instigators of H2 priorities, and I will say that I've said this in HTTP as well, I just want to say it is my belief that this scheme has failed. H2 priorities, in my opinion, as one of the instigators, has failed in its design intent. There are many reasons for that, but it's failed. I think we should move on.
Thank you.
So, Martin Thompson, from my perspective, I definitely agree with Roberto. I think there is general consensus that there is value in having the client signal priorities. Kazuo suggested that there's value in also having origin servers signal priorities to gateways, which is a new concept and a good one, I think, but I haven't thought it all the way through. So there's a lot of work to do here. I would caution against overestimating our ability to resolve this issue in the time that we have left in this working group to get something shipped. If we put this on the critical path, I have doubts that we'll see anything in RFC form next year, and that worries me.
So I just also want to remind everybody that anything the client says about priorities is a hint, and it doesn't matter what you spec. And this is what we're seeing in our implementations today. I think that it's an interesting take to cut priorities out right now, because one of two things is going to happen. Either it will be perfectly fine and we'll just move on, right? Or we will experience some extreme shittiness in some cases, and we will be incented to fix it. Both of those are actually interesting outcomes.
Jana Iyengar, just a quick note that Robin Marks has sent a nice summary of the side meeting on issue 2924. For those of you who missed it, there's also a link to the notes from his notes, I think, of the side meeting. I'm not sure exactly what this discussion is about. If we are discussing whether to remove priorities or not, that seems to have been done at the side meeting, and I expect it will happen in the HTTP BEST meeting as well. If you're talking about creating a new priority scheme, I heard Martin Thompson say he'd quit. I might as well. But that's sort of are we talking about creating a new priority scheme in this working group or in the HTTP working group?
No. I think what we're talking about is, from this working group's perspective, either shipping HTTP3 with an HTTP2 compatible priority scheme, or shipping or negotiating and talking to the community, the broader community past this working group, about shipping HTTP3 with no priority scheme in some fashion.
So I'm actually very much in support of the latter, which is to have this discussion with the broader HTTP community and try to go towards shipping without any priorities, knowing fully well that servers will still actually do, server implementations will still do prioritization, just not based on the priorities frame.
Ah, wow. And to be clear, we keep on saying priority scheme. What we really mean is a client-to-server hinting scheme to help it make decisions about priorities. And when I say ship H3 with no priority scheme, that need will be filled in some fashion, just not by us.
David Skinazi, Google. I want to agree with a lot of the previous points that what we currently have in the spec is very complicated and let's just say unideal. My personal preference would be to not have the hints in the core spec, because as we've seen, this could delay us for quite a while. And I would love to see, and I think there will be, experimentation with hints, new hint schemes, but all those can be implemented as extensions, and we would probably be experimenting with those and deploying them in production as well. But it would be really nice to not block the shipping of the core spec due to this experimentation. If they can all land later, that's fine.
Kazuho, I wanted to say that I agree with Martin Thompson. He says that we shouldn't be blocking HTTP3 due to lack of priorities. And my reasoning is that the server deployments have the experience of handling browsers that do not send priorities in the correct way. So we know how to prioritize against them. So it's not the end of the world if we ship HTTP3 without priorities.
Roberto Peon, I think in classic fashion, Kazuo is understating the situation here. It's not just that clients may or may not arguably send something that is correct. It's that the servers ignore it, right? So the purpose of putting any of this stuff into a spec is for interop. And given that these are hints, they were always optional to begin with. To be clear, they were always optional, right? We never had a must on this, except that you have to receive it and discard it, right? So at worst, if we do nothing and we keep H2 priorities in the spec, we can receive and discard. I think that that is suboptimal because it's a waste of bytes. I believe that it is better to say, hey, it was hints, we got it wrong, let's move forward. But either outcome probably shouldn't block our deciding to deliver H3, because these are hints, and we can acknowledge we got them wrong because interop is terrible, right?
And to what Kazuho said, I mean, one of the negative outcomes here that is a concern in the back of my mind is that we could have, a lot of different party schemes emerge that, muddy the waters even more. But in some ways, that's already happened. We have such drastically different uses of the existing party scheme. It's not a great situation for servers anyway. So,
Lucas Padu, Cloudflare. I generally agree with Roberto's points, but I'd want to disagree on one aspect, which relates to placeholders. It's hard to ignore. It's hard to create the hint when we're talking about this a quantity of placeholders, where you might need a certain value for that quantity to create the prioritization structure that you want for your user agent, and the server doesn't give that to you, and that's a negotiable value and quite a wide scale. So you end up adding complexity into the user agents that now have to do prioritization schemes in H2 and H3, and maybe diverge in the H3 space. And I think that's a problem for the interop.
We are now out of our time box. So I think sorry, Alan. I think what we probably want to do at this point is do a hum. And I think the options for that hum are to keep H2 priorities in H3, or H2 compatible priorities, or to negotiate the removal with the greater community, or we don't know yet. Are those good options? Okay. If you believe that we should keep H2 priorities in H3 or H2 compatible priorities, please hum now. If you believe that, I should look online. Sorry?
So we have Dimitri suggesting that he wants to keep H2 priorities in. That's the only person I see in the
So he
chat.
hummed for that, thank you.
Yeah.
The priorities are keep H2 compatible priorities, remove them from H3, or we don't know yet. So if you would, so we've done the first one. If you believe we should negotiate with the greater community to remove H2 compatible priorities from HTTP3 and effectively ship it with No hints from the client to the server as to priority. Please hum now. Is it a question of
Mark, you snuck
It
something in there.
is. You slipped a little bit into B there that hadn't been part of the description of the hum prior to making that.
What did I slip in?
So you initially described the second option as not making H2 priority as part of H3 and negotiating with the community with the implication of how that would happen. And then when you said it the second time, you said how that would happen would be not shipping a priority mechanism in H3. Those are different things.
Yeah, and I think what Patrick is implying there is that if we do find a priority scheme that we all agree on and the community is behind, we can put it in the spec.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, well,
but again, we're not binding future action here. You know,
Yeah,
we can't know that that's going to happen.
I'm arguing that the definition of what negotiation has to be amongst multiple parties, including your other working group as well. Like HTTP is going to be very interested in what this may look like. Right?
Sure.
Even if we feel as a quick working group that no one's going to implement the H2 thing, I think that negotiation could encompass a bunch of different outcomes.
If the HTTP working group comes back and says, you have to ship H3 with some priority scheme, but we don't care what it is, or use this one, well, then we're going to have that discussion. Wow.
Right. Yeah, and I'm fine with that. The last time you described what option B was, you actually removed that as a possibility.
That was not the intent. So I'll rerun that hum. I'm a little wary of trying to restate it because I'll probably mess it up again. But if you do not want to preserve H2 compatible priorities in HTTP 3, please hum now. And if you think we don't have enough information yet to make this decision, please hum now. Okay. That was pretty strong.
So we had 1 for 3 in Java. That's
okay. 1 for 3. Okay. I think the next step then is to take this discussion tomorrow to the HTTP working group and see what that community feels. Hopefully it will align with what we hear here and we can move forward. Thank you. So next up is the recovery issues.
To correct that last one, Robin changed his mind to 2 after that one.
Okay.
Which I think implies we don't know yet is the underlying message there.
Okay.
Sure. 2789. Before I look it up, so anybody feels like they're owning it.
Where are the blue sheets right now? Who has the blue sheets? Kingdom. Could you please send them towards the middle, please? The middle section. Thank you.
So Martin Thompson raised this. Does anybody want to summarize for us? Martin, do you have a state for this? It's actually a Gory issue originally.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I understood what Gory suggested. Can you bring it up there?
Yes.
I think I quoted Gory's mail.
I'm doing stuff on the wrong
There's
screen.
been some discussion on this one. So there was something about a longer. So you've got an RTT estimate for the current path, and there was a suggestion that you might be able to use that as the basis for the initial RTT on a new path.
So Gory's behind you,
directly.
in case you want to.
Gory, do you want to? Oh, you're drinking. And I read from that maybe multiplying that out or increasing that value somewhat to be a little conservative would be a good idea. But there's been a lot of discussion on this. Gory, can you summarize?
I tried to write down something which I thought was what TCP does, and then the basic thing here is to try and avoid lots and lots of quick flows all starting at the same time, then all retransmitting at the same time, etc., creating some congestion collapse.
So what's the way forward?
Better text. If the principle here is to do what TCP would do in this environment, then I think the text needs to be improved to show that back off more clearly. What do the authors of the document think?
I think, so Sorry, we actually talked to the person for quite a while with Corey on Saturday, and we failed to notice this issue because I think Martin Thompson filed it. I think some of the text has improved since Corey originally wrote this, and some of it was maybe a bit unclear. So I think we basically, this probably is, I don't know if this is an editorial issue or not, because we don't have a PR yet, but I think we can resolve this among like John and I and Corey.
You're a bit hard to hear when you speak into the side of the microphone, but I think you said you want a PR. Do you want Corey to prepare one, or would you?
I think John and I are on the hook for preparing one,
Okay.
but we need to talk to him about it.
All right, so we mark this as, do you want to do the ticket editing? All right, so editors have the token to prepare a PR. And we got more comments though in the line there. Or not, Corey. Martin's ear is not the microphone.
So for what it's worth, we already, if we're talking about using the path challenge and path response frames, that the seed would be basically equivalent to an initial RTT seed, and we use 2 times the initial RTT for the initial timeout anyways. So it's actually even more than the 1.5 that you're suggesting.
And the 1.5 thing was a little bit complicated anyway. I think the intention here is to do the right thing. So I don't have a protocol question, but I just think we should all work together on the text. And I don't think the working group will be surprised at the outcome at all.
Okay, so this can be done quickly is what I'm hearing.
Yes, and in other implementations too.
Yeah, and it's only a design issue because it changes some specification text, but it's basically editorial because we are just aligning with TCP. Got it. Thank you. Jana, stay up there. Next one is yours, 2630. Define underutilization of C-wind. I thought there was text that had improved that. Discussed in London. We'd like to... Ian wrote this.
Gori, who did CWV, this is complicated. And it's complicated to get the text. The intent, again, was easy. I don't think we got the new text finished, did we?
We have Praveen in the line remotely.
There's a PR for this, I think. Right? Yeah, there's been a PR for it for a while. We just kind of keep going back and forth on it. It's rather difficult to get right. I need someone to. I guess we need more people to review it, but yeah, Praveen.
Yeah, so I was saying that.
Ooh, this is not working, Praveen.
Give him 10 seconds. Give him 10 seconds.
No, give it a moment. That mic will settle.
Jonna, please. Praveen, try now.
Yes, so I was saying instead of trying to specify what the underutilization of C-wind means, I think capping the C-wind seems to be the right idea. So we actually specified possible algorithms in that thread. So capping the C-wind growth might be enough mitigation here.
Praveen, you're very, very hard to hear. Can you stick that into the ticket instead as a comment, please? The audio is really poor.
Sure.
Thank you. At least it was poor up here. I don't know if you heard.
I can restate what Praveen just said, please. And he can correct me if he believes I'm wrong. He said that we have algorithms for capping the C-wind, and that's something that we ought to be able to do instead of having to specify what underutilized means. I think that's probably going to be harder to do, but we might disagree on that. The whole reason we want to specify what underutilizing the C-wind means is to avoid bursting when you have your bytes in flight is substantially below the congestion window. And so we've had discussions around that. Gori, Ian, and I have had a discussion around that, and I think we have some way to go around that.
I actually think, John, unfortunately, that's the other issue that you're thinking about. The underutilization one is actually about not growing the congestion window when you are not using the congestion window. There's a separate issue about not bursting too much into the network. They're both, I attempted to address both of them in one PR because they're somewhat related.
Okay.
I think as much as anything on this stuff, we just need like people who have strong opinions to either write text or take a closer look at the existing PR and try to make proactive suggestions about trying to fix it, because I think we're going in the right general direction. I don't think there's a big design issue here, but we need to like actually land something.
All of these are somewhat related, right? And I wonder if it makes sense to have like a recovery design team that would work through them in conjunction rather than having like 3 different issue discussions going on?
Sorry, I don't think we need a design team. I think we need people to engage on the recovery document. We can propose, as Ian said, there is a PR right now that basically does talk about what effectively underutilization means, and that's basically very exact, right? As long as your bytes in flight is less than the congestion window, it's underutilized.
Okay.
So the proposal is there. If people want to suggest other things, then
we need people to say yes or no and or propose edits.
Right. And people to engage on those PRs.
Gori Fairhurst here. I mean, let's be honest. Jan and I did not apply enough cycles on this in the last period, and it's now important, so we will apply cycles now, and we'd love other people to join us.
Thank you. Which brings us to 2556. Somewhere I feel we had to close this at some point. Maybe I'm wrong. Should K persistent congestion threshold be 2 or 3? From opened by Praveen in March. So a bunch of discussion in March, and then April, and then May. And it says best to bring this up at the full IETF meeting, which we're doing now.
Okay, can someone help me here? Is this something that can be decided with a coin flip, or is this something substantive that we need to understand?
I think the question is which is closer to what TCP does. Right.
I don't think that's a principle that we should be like. If TCP has some principles we can reuse to help us make this decision, and that's fantastic. But what's the principle?
The current value was chosen because previously in the spec you could fire the TLS probe twice before firing an RTO and declaring all bytes in flight lost, and basically declaring persistent congestion. And so we picked the constant that was most similar to that model, which is like you get 2 timeouts and then the third one, you're done. And that's how the current number was chosen. I mean, it's a constant, it's a little bit magic, but it basically allows you to lose packets twice, tail packets twice before you declare persistent congestion.
Yoshifumi.
Yeah, I mean, we can make it one or the other and let implementations choose. That's what we did actually up above in the PTO text. We said you can send 1 or 2 full-sized MSS opposed to just prescribing only 1.
This is Yoshi. Yeah, one question. Do you have some data point of this one?
About which, like this being a better value than, I can't provide any data on this particular number. I've never tried
Yeah. I think we should discuss based on data. That would be better, I think.
So I'm trying to page this back in, and is the problem, if I remember correctly, is the discussion of whether we should model 2 TLPs and an RTO or 1 TLP and an RTO. Is that correct?
That is basically the question.
Right. So the spec arbitrarily for TCP says 1 TLP, and it doesn't really say you can't do multiple TLPs. The spec says 1 or 2, and we say here 2 TLPs and then an RTO. That's effectively what we've modeled. Because in QUIC, there is no separation between tail loss probes and RTOs. There's only a PTO. If we use the same period of time that it would take to fire 2 TLPs followed by an RTO and TCP as the model for how long we should wait before declaring what we call persistent congestion. I think that's a reasonable model. 2 PTOs seems better than 1 simply because it's 1 packet on a TLP is too sensitive, we believe, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to do that. That's why the numbers what it is there.
So one proposal would be to close with no action, because we have now very soon, hopefully thanks to the simulator that you guys did, the ability to actually validate some of those things. And if somebody finds an issue in validation, we can reopen. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah. Martin Thompson, I think there are 2 valid paths here. One is to say 2 is fine, we'll get more data, we'll get we'll sort it out later. The other one is to say 2 or 3 is acceptable, and implementations can decide on their own, and we'll get more data and refine that as we go on. I don't have a preference on either one of those. I'm a little cautious about being confident that we can get the information we need to make a solid, firm decision on this one. I don't think that's ever the case, that we'll have enough information to be really confident about these sorts of constants. So I would actually lean towards saying 2 or 3 and recognize that, and maybe even explicitly acknowledge that we don't really know what the right answer is here.
Which one is more conservative, 2 or 3? Which one is more conservative?
2, I think, will get you a lower congestion window over time.
So in the absence of data that we should do 3, let's do 2. That would be one proposal.
But I mean, in the absence of data, we could also choose 3 because it's conservative enough. Now, I don't
But the
want
conservative choice is,
It honestly, it doesn't matter to me. What I think may be more useful here is a elucidation of why, or what the value means. What happens if you change the value to 3? What happens if we change the value to 2? And people are going to set the constants the way they want anyways. So we might as well recognize that and simply describe the effects of doing this. I don't mind allowing 2 or 3.
We can, and I'm not so strongly opposed to doing that. I just sort of thinking of an implementer that just wants to implement this and not like work through whether he should use 2 or 3 and why. You want to make it easy to people to do the right thing, and the more knobs you give them, and the more like thinking you require, because I would put 3 because it's bigger.
So
anyway, but I think we sort of Gauri, take us home, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Can I try on this? First of all, Gauri first again. This is actually new ground in the IETF. Surprisingly, we have lots of things about congestion control all over the place in RFCs, but we don't really have some sort of, this is how the principles work. I'm trying to propose something in TCPM on that, and you might want to look at that, or we might want to see if we can take it forward. In the absence of that, how about should do 2, but must not do more than 3? Or something that really sets a hard limit. 3, more than 3 is probably dangerous. 2 is definitely safe. You choose.
Praveen in Jabber says he agrees to close with no action and revisit if there's data suggesting otherwise. And I see a thumbs up from Jana.
Let's do that.
Okay, we're doing that. Can you update the ticket? And we're going to the next one, which is 2555, which is related to what we talked about earlier. Opened by Praveen. Define idle period for congestion control. This is from March. And we talked about it in London and said, let's take it to the IETF.
I think this is the other, this is also the defined underutilization of the congestion window here. But, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what we're going to resolve at the moment. I mean, I think this is Praveen, Gauri, and Jana maybe need to talk. I don't know.
So a couple of more points around this. First, I think Ian's exactly right that there is something proposed in 2675. People should take a look and comment and see if that's adequate and say something if it's not. Second, on the general issue of idle period between whatever that was, on defining idle period and what to do during an idle period, we specifically chose not to walk into that territory because Gauri knows how painful that is. And we would like to, we've deferred the discussion to his RFC, which is the CWV, the new CWV RFC, which I think is adequate. We don't need to spend time in this document, I believe, on making sure that we can write people are free to write follow-on documents, but at the moment we've deferred to that one.
So you're saying we have a PR, people should look at it and see if it addresses the issue, and if it does, then we're done.
Yeah, and also recognize that the text already defers to the new CW document for idle periods.
Okay. also discussed in Montreal. People to review the PR. And the last one is 2534. ECN text disables ECN2 aggressively by Martin Duke.
Yeah, this we talked about yesterday, but there's a PR. It needs some updates based on comments. I think this is just Jana getting time to do the updates.
Yeah, this we discussed yesterday with the transport issues. This is fine.
Okay, but I guess we'll hopefully get this soonish.
Yeah, we're gonna get this week. I'm working on it
Okay.
now, but we'll get an update on this, and there is engagement on this PR, but it's on me. I have not been able to update it, but I'm gonna update it.
I'm pretty sure Magnus is buying a spear if he had a first document with no issues open. Just saying.
Sorry, say that again?
Pretty sure Magnus is taking you out for drinks if you're the first document with no open issues out of Quick.
That's promising.
I like volunteering other people's budgets. So.
So that takes us through the recovery issues. Before we move on, I wanted to ask what I've been asking a lot recently, Ian especially, and Jana. How do you feel about moving this document to a late stage process?
Just one issue that's it does exist on the list, but has not been typed yet because Gauri filed it. Was it this morning or last night? Something like that. It's a recovery issue.
Give me a number.
It's hang on. Gauri, the top of the list is
this one?
not good enough because the top moves rapidly here on this. 2923. The top of the list moves by 5 every 1 hour.
This one? WinRTT management?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is just a question. We have a min-RTT, and we also have the expectation that quick flows last for a long time in some cases, because we might use them over hours. And min-RTT records the smallest RTT we saw on the path. You're going to change connection to path in the document. But that is min forever, and if your path changes, then the min-RTT changes significantly. So if min-RTT is useful, then maybe we should periodically reset min-RTT. Question, what do we think?
It's a good point. So LetBat has a similar concept of min-RTT, and I think we do something there where we don't let it, be unbounded, or we refresh it over the lifetime of connection, and something similar makes sense here too. I agree. Does anybody know what LetBat's doing? Can we just copy that? Or Martin?
John is saying off mic that not sure that LetBat does anything. Martin Thompson, I would suggest something less than a completely naive implementation where you just sort of cut and start over every 10 minutes. I'd suggest this is probably something you want to do in terms of number of samples rather than time, and you might want to give the replacement min-RTT a little bit of soak time before you threw it in over the top of the existing one.
So Praveen in Jabber says that possible expiration events for min-RTT might be persistent connection, SS changes, and app idle. So not have a fixed scheme, but make basically an event-based scheme to invalidate min-RTT.
My proposal was the very simplest, which I think would be helpful, which is do the same as path MTU discovery. Every 10 minutes, just read the RTT and work from there. I think all these other proposals are better and more helpful and slightly more code. So somebody has to make a call. It partly depends on what you're going to use min-RTT for. It's used as a rejection thing for rejection samples at the moment, so it's not that critical whether you get it right. It's important that you don't get it wildly wrong for long periods of time.
Yeah, Cleveland. Yeah, LetBat does something more complicated because it depends more on it, so I don't think it's super useful. But +1 too, it should be reset on idle, and maybe every 10 minutes or something. It's really high.
Okay. Does anybody want to take a token for writing something up?
So, Roberto Peon, while what I'm saying may be editorial, but it's super nice when the thing actually is what it says. If it's called min-RTT, I will find it confusing. This is why I say this is potentially editorial.
We'll call it low RTT or something like that.
Yeah, sure. Just, so long as I don't have to have a variable in my code that says actual min-RTT somewhere, sure.
Andrew McGregor, I recall somewhere in the Linux kernel there's a very simple algorithm for a sliding windowed maximum. I think maybe we want to adopt the inverse of that. And so, yes, it becomes a windowed min RTT, and I'd suggest the window be in samples or anything else. But, you know, that seems like a reasonable thing. So, Martin Thompson, it occurs to me that there are many possible ways you could paint this particular bike shed, and it really is a bike shed. I think that we want to make some suggestions and not do anything more concrete than that. The suggestion, for instance, the idea that you reset this on idle won't work for a number of very common usage patterns, because the definition of idle is such that we actually get that very frequently, particularly in sort of things like web browsing cases and whatnot, where we often have periods where there's nothing to send. That's something we have to take into account.
Yes, I think the congestion control meaning of idle isn't the event doesn't start immediately when you run out of data to send. It's usually anyway, but yes. I agree that so maybe the way forward here is, so I think we triage this as a design item and have a very simple thing that we say, you know, you can do this, but you can also do other things. But the point is to not let it basically be unchecked for a long time.
Yeah, I think a recommendation is fine.
And if somebody wants to put a PR in, and then people at the microphone can have a quick discussion on whether it's reasonable, we can probably bury this pretty quickly.
Okay. Yeah, let's move forward to that. So this is like a May should do something about this, and with a recommendation of a particular algorithm that you could use if you want to, correct? Okay.
Jana Inga. So I agree with the idea that we should build something fairly simple, but we should build something fairly simple. And it's important to bear in mind that this is the consequences of getting the min RTT wrong here. So this is not a congestion control issue. It's a loss recovery issue. The min RTT in Quick is used primarily to reject samples that might be too small than the measured min RTT. So that's in the worst case, you end up having some samples that go in. You might have some. I think you might have some spurious retransmissions because of that. But that's the worst that would happen. Yeah. So bear in mind that this is not something you need a complicated machinery for. If you already have complicated machinery that you use for your congestion controller, feel absolutely free to use that for this. But we should have some basic protection against an old min RTT being there in the case of a path change.
Okay.
So I started to ask before, John and Ian, any thoughts about taking this list stage process?
I think the document itself is getting in very close to the right shape. I'd still like the late stage process to be a little faster, but that's just me.
And I'm happy to defer. At the pace the document is going, I don't think the late stage process is going to slow it down.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. I don't think that the velocity of change here is that dramatic. Which also leads to the other question, right? We've not gotten a ton of feedback. We've gotten feedback from a couple of people, right, on the document, but not everybody. So I don't know where people are on implementing loss recovery, on implementing congestion control. This is part of the reason that Martin and I worked on building the simulator testing framework so that we could actually test what people's implementations are doing. My hope is people are planning to get there soon, even if they haven't gotten there. I don't know how you want to use that information in informing this process, though.
We don't need to go deeply into this. I just wanted to get a sense of whether you thought we were ready or not. Sounds like you want a bit more time. That's fine.
My impression from talking to the implementers is that some implementers are actually just tying the quick stack into whatever congestion control framework they have for other transports. Others implement, Cubic in some way. Some are actually trying to implement the recovery draft. And then I don't know if there's still any out there that just have a quick hack that's mostly flow control based. I think those are like upgrading to proper congestion control now, or have done that. But those are sort of the three approaches that I see implementations following.
Is it possible for me to ask of a show of hands of how many people have read the recovery document?
Sure.
Oh.
Probably
Oh, that's
20.
good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Maybe they've read and just don't care. But I was going to say that condition control, yes, you're right. People will use other controllers because it's much harder to implement those ones. But loss recovery should be is going to have to be brand new. So we would definitely, for the people who read and for the people who've implemented, we'd definitely like to hear some feedback on whether you think there are clarifications required, or even if it all went well, that'd be very useful feedback to have.
Very briefly, Eric Kinnear, Apple. To what Lars said, we've actually done both. We've got Cubic and all that, but we also just did a vanilla exactly what's in the recovery draft. And I think the last time we asked this question, I stood up and said, hey, I think we need more time before we do the late stage process because nobody's really poked at it yet. And I think now we're seeing that most people have poked it. We've done a nice rev of kind of how do we word it, what's confusing, what makes sense, what just flat out doesn't work. And we're kind of into the place where we still have a bunch of testing we need to do, but any changes that I think, at least on my end, I'd be saying, hey, we really need to change this, would have a bunch of like test results and data behind them, which kind of fits okay in late stage process too.
Yeah, it sounds like we're getting there, but not quite there yet. Okay, so we have 9 minutes left. We have the HTTP issues up. I don't think we're gonna have time to go through them. So Mike Bishop, there you are. Anything in particular you'd like some information or help from the working group on in this time? 2632? Okay.
So I was looking through the issues, trying to find a couple that hopefully we could make good progress on in a couple minutes. At the interim, we said that we were going to reread 7540 and ask a question of the HTTP mailing list with regard to this issue. That has happened, and so we want to see if anyone's opinion has changed. To recap this issue, it's basically the observation that go away in H2 refers to streams and tells makes things stop in both directions. It makes push stop as well. Where it's intended to refer to requests and in fact does refer to request streams in H3, but that's a difference from H2. It doesn't do anything about push other than let the transaction finish as part of the response. So there are two schools of thought here. We just need to pick one and move on.
Any thoughts about that?
Alan Findell. I'll just repeat that I filed this issue and I still think it should be symmetric and similar to H2 and not.
Anyone want to argue the converse?
Yeah, I want to argue the converse. This all depends on your conception of push, and we have different. Alan and I have different views on this one because we have different understandings of what push really means, and I think this is the fundamental disagreement here. I see push being related to the requests, and so if you shut down the requests, you ultimately need to allow the pushes to continue. Alan has a different view on that one.
Does anyone else in the room care about the outcome? Alan and Martin, what are you doing for lunch?
So far, I have 2 different lunches.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, at some point, if you two could collaborate a little bit and maybe try and find a way forward, that'd be great.
Sorry, I was going to say that I kind of care, and I tend to, given where we're at, favor Martin's perspective.
Okay. Mike, to be clear, is this issue a blocker for you?
It is one of the things keeping us from hitting ZBB. A lot of the remaining open issues are related to priority, and if we decide that priority is coming out, I can close over half the issues.
Ooh.
Oi.
Yeah. I'll commit to talking to Alan about this one.
Okay.
No. This is something that is perfectly suited to the late stage process,
Sure.
honestly. So don't let this be a
Right.
blocker.
I mean, I would take a hum. I just don't think that we have enough information to make it an informed one. So
No, and we can develop presentation material if people feel that they need to understand this a little better. But
Okay.
I think the people who understand the problem and already have the information that they need, I think we just disagree on what the right models to enable are.
Right. I'm just interrupt, Mike. Are there any other issues that you would like to discuss right now?
I don't know that there are anywhere 2 or 3 minutes here is going to be more productive than the list.
Okay, thank you. Roberta, did you have a thought that you wanted to convey? Okay. Convey it in 3 minutes.
It shouldn't take that long. Unless you want me to take the full 3 minutes. But anyway, I think that what we might be seeing here is a bit of the tussle between whether or not go away makes the most sense of the H3 layer or the layer beneath. I wouldn't say transport, but a layer beneath. I don't believe we're going to resolve that in V1. I don't know if that changes anyone's opinions. So there you go.
I'm firmly against moving go away any further down, for the reasons that have already been discussed at length. No, period.
Okay. Sounds like we need to take a discussion of the list and have some hallway discussions. With that, I think we're just about done. As we mentioned, we're going to try to announce an interim as soon as possible. Again, we're thinking probably October, early October to mid-October, I think is our current thinking. But we'll get that information to you as soon as we possibly can.
And North America.
And we're looking at North America now. It would be, at this point, we're trying really hard for North America. If for some reason we really can't find a location, we might have to fall back somewhere else, but that's our intent right now. So thanks for that.
And we'll do an interrupt again there. I'll also send out a doodle poll for another virtual interrupt between now and October, which would probably be, I guess whenever the next draft revisions drop would be a natural time to have it, since people are still not fully on board with -22.
And where's the other blue sheet? We have a missing blue sheet. Anyone have the blue sheet? Okay. See you next time. That was relatively effective. Can you
all my sessions have been used. Oh God.
I'm gonna have to give some feedback to the secretariat to say, I know people are working what they've got, but the acoustics plus with the AV.
Okay.